Mary Pickford is often remembered as one of the brightest names in early Hollywood, a woman whose image once defined innocence, success, and stardom. But behind that carefully built public glow, her real life told a very different story, one filled with pressure, loneliness, and emotional struggle. Many people believe that fame and wealth automatically bring happiness, as if success completes a person's life. It sounds logical, almost comforting, but reality often refuses to follow that idea. Mary Pickford's life becomes a powerful example of how misleading that belief can be. At the height of her career, she wasn't just famous, she was one of the highest paid figures in Hollywood, second only to a few. From the outside, it looked like she had everything anyone could dream of. But if we travel back into her world, behind the cameras and carefully staged smiles, a far more complicated story begins to unfold. Mary Pickford's journey was not simply glamorous, it was intense, exhausting, and at times deeply painful. Her personal life carried emotional weight that never fully disappeared, even as her fame grew stronger. While the world adored her, she was constantly working on herself, pushing her craft to perfection, determined to remain at the very top of her art. On screen, she was sold as the nation's sweetheart, a symbol of purity and charm. Audiences believed in the graceful image she projected, and the studio built an entire empire around that illusion. Yet behind closed doors, Mary was far more complex than the characters she played. The sweet, delicate roles that made her famous did not fully reflect who she was as a person. Instead, she lived under the constant pressure of maintaining an image that was carefully designed for public consumption. Every smile, every gesture, every strand of her carefully styled appearance was part of a larger system meant to preserve the fantasy. Even her marriage and personal relationships were not free from strain. At times, she reportedly felt emotionally unsupported, and that isolation added to the weight she already carried. Despite her achievements, there were moments where she seemed to rebuild herself daily, holding everything together through sheer determination. Mary Pickford was not simply a sweetheart, in the way the world labeled her. That title was more of a studio invention than a reflection of her full identity. In truth, she was a powerhouse of early cinema, a figure so influential that academic studies have been dedicated to analyzing her impact on film history. To some scholars, she is not just a star, but a foundational figure who helped shape the language of motion pictures. Yet even icons have their frustrations. One of the most surprising details about Mary Pickford's life is her resistance to the arrival of sound in films. She belonged to the silent era, where expression was everything, where emotions were conveyed through movement, eyes, and body language rather than dialogue. To her, early talkies felt awkward and restrictive, almost like they stripped cinema of its pure artistic form. She once compared it to something beautiful being altered in a way that felt unnecessary, as if art itself was being forced into a new mold. And she wasn't alone in that feeling. The transition from silent films to sound was chaotic for many actors, but for Pickford it was especially difficult. The expressive freedom she had mastered suddenly felt limited, replaced by early technical limitations that made performances feel stiff and unnatural. There were also aspects of her iconic image she personally disliked. Her famous golden curls, carefully styled and maintained, became a trademark of her stardom. The public adored them, and the studios used them as part of her branding. But behind the scenes, she reportedly resented how much control the industry had over even the smallest details of her appearance. Her hair, her image, even her persona were all shaped to fit a commercial ideal. The same image that made her a global star also trapped her inside expectations she didn't fully choose. Still, despite everything, the pressure, the image, the emotional weight, Mary Pickford remained one of the most important figures in early Hollywood history. Her life was not just a story of fame, but a reminder that behind every legendary name, there can be a human being carrying struggles the audience never sees. And perhaps that is the real truth behind her legacy. Not perfection, not fantasy, but the complex reality of a woman who lived between two worlds, the one the audience adored and the one she had to survive. Mary Pickford's story takes a turn that feels almost symbolic of her entire life, quiet, deliberate, and powerful in ways the public did not fully understand at the time. What people often remember as part of her image was never enough for her. She was determined to become something greater than the role she was assigned, and that determination eventually led her to make a bold, almost shocking decision. The signature look she was known for, her carefully styled golden curls, was gone. To her, it wasn't just a hairstyle. It was a statement. A way of reclaiming control over an image that had been built and controlled by others for years. The reaction was immediate and intense. What should have been a personal choice turned into a national conversation. The public was stunned, almost outraged as if something far bigger had been disrupted. Fans who had grown up watching her as the eternal symbol of innocence and femininity struggled to accept the change. To them, she wasn't just an actress, she was an idea, a carefully preserved fantasy, and now that fantasy had shifted. Some reactions were so extreme that it felt less like a celebrity change and more like a cultural shockwave. Mary Pickford had become so iconic that even the smallest alteration to her appearance felt like a breaking of trust with her audience. At the same time, her influence extended far beyond image alone. Her hair had become so famous that it carried almost mythical value. It was said that when she once donated a strand of her hair to support war efforts during World War I, it sold for an astonishing $115,000, an unbelievable figure for the time, showing just how powerful her public image had become. But beneath all of this attention was a deeper truth. Mary Pickford was not someone who could be easily shaped or controlled. Her life experiences had taught her resilience, caution, and a strong desire for independence. She had grown into someone who understood the weight of control, who held it, lost it, and fought to reclaim it. By the time Hollywood studios began tightening their grip on actors and their earnings, Mary was already one of the most powerful names in the industry. She had started her career earning just $10 per day in 1909, a modest beginning for someone who would later reshape the entire film business. Within a decade, her salary had skyrocketed to around $250,000 per film by 1919, a staggering achievement in an era when the industry itself was still forming. But success came with a difficult question. What was she giving up in exchange for it? This is where her story becomes more than just fame and money. It becomes a reflection of a deeper conflict many artists face, the tension between financial success and personal values. At some point, every successful performer reaches a moment where they must decide what matters more: control, integrity, or the system that rewards them. Mary Pickford was not willing to remain under complete control, even for extraordinary wealth. Instead, she chose a different path. Alongside Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and Douglas Fairbanks, she helped create United Artists, a groundbreaking studio designed to give actors ownership over their work. It was more than a business, it was a revolution. United Artists allowed performers to produce, distribute, and profit from their films independently. For the first time, the power dynamic in Hollywood began to shift. The studio itself reflected elegance and ambition, built to represent artistic freedom rather than corporate control. Even before United Artists came into existence, Mary and Douglas Fairbanks had already taken a major step by forming their own production company, the Pickford Fairbanks Studio. This gave her unprecedented influence over every aspect of filmmaking, from scripts and casting to directors and production teams. She was no longer just an actress performing roles, she was shaping entire productions. If you look at Hollywood's history today, especially major events like the Academy Awards, Mary Pickford's name might not always be the first that comes to mind. But her influence is deeply embedded in its foundation. She was one of the original 36 founders of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, a legacy that still shapes the film industry today. This level of influence made her one of the most powerful women in entertainment history. But contrary to what power sometimes suggests, Mary was not harsh or controlling. In fact, those who worked with her often described her as thoughtful and measured. When disagreements arose on set, she preferred private conversations rather than public conflict. She believed in resolving issues quietly without unnecessary drama. Despite her authority, she was deeply aware of others' struggles. She often carried a small bucket on film sets, encouraging colleagues to contribute what they could to help struggling workers in the industry. This simple act reflected a larger pattern in her life. She was not just focused on her own success, but on the well-being of others around her. Her compassion extended beyond informal gestures. She played a key role in organizing the Motion Picture Relief Fund and supported initiatives aimed at preserving early films. Over time, she also contributed to multiple charitable causes, using her influence to build systems of support within the entertainment world. But this raises an important question. Why was Mary Pickford so deeply committed to helping others? The answer lies in her past. Film historian Scott Amon, author of Mary Pickford, From Here to Hollywood, described her as someone who was attuned to human misery. While the phrase may sound intense, it reflects the reality of her early life. Mary grew up in a family constantly on the edge of poverty. Stability was fragile, and survival often depended on uncertain circumstances. Her father eventually left the family, a loss that created emotional and financial strain. Around the same time, Mary faced repeated health challenges, including illnesses such as pneumonia and tuberculosis. At one point, health authorities even quarantined her family due to concerns about contagious diseases. Life during this period was marked by instability and hardship. Eventually, her father's death added another layer of emotional complexity. Although he had abandoned the family, the loss still deeply affected them, especially her mother Charlotte, who struggled to cope. To survive financially, Charlotte took in boarders for rent. One of these boarders worked in theater and recognized something special in the household's children. He encouraged Mary and her sister to take small roles in stage productions and helped connect the family to early performance opportunities. This was the beginning of everything. Mary first appeared on stage as a child, performing under her original name before it would later change. These early experiences introduced her to acting, and more importantly, to the world of theater as a possible future. The family soon became involved in touring stage productions, traveling across America and performing in various theatrical shows. Although the environment was sometimes unstable and filled with uncertainty, it also gave Mary something rare: exposure and experience in performance from a very young age. As she grew older, Mary began to rise above her siblings in recognition and talent. But even then she felt restless. She was no longer satisfied with small stage roles or traveling performances. She wanted something bigger, something more visible, more respected, and more permanent. There was a moment when she considered leaving acting entirely. The life of a touring performer no longer felt fulfilling. She wanted to be part of something greater, something that placed her among the brightest stars of Broadway. And eventually that opportunity came. At just 15 years old, Mary Pickford made her Broadway debut during the summer season. It was a turning point in her life, marking the beginning of her transformation from a child performer into a rising theatrical figure. Around this time, she adopted the name Mary Pickford, the name that would soon become legendary. From that moment forward, her journey was no longer just about survival or opportunity, it became about legacy. However, Mary Pickford's journey on Broadway did not last long. She soon stepped away from the stage, and the year 1909 marked a turning point in her life. That was the year she entered the world of silent films, beginning a career that would completely transform her destiny. In a single year, she appeared in an astonishing number of productions, around 51 films, taking on a wide range of characters and rapidly proving her versatility on screen. During this early phase of her career, she worked under the direction of D.W. Griffith. The experience was a mix of opportunity and pressure. Griffith was deeply focused on bringing out emotional realism in his actors, and while his methods helped shape Mary's skills, they also pushed her into uncomfortable territory. His approach was intense, sometimes emotionally demanding, and it left a lasting impact on her early development as an actress. One of the most complicated aspects of this period was how personal and professional boundaries began to blur. In an effort to create natural chemistry on screen, Griffith paired her with an actor she already admired from a distance, Owen Moore. What started as a professional collaboration slowly turned into a personal connection. The two found themselves drawn to each other, and before long, affection grew into a romantic relationship. Mary's mother, Charlotte, did not approve. From the very beginning, she saw Owen as unsuitable and even warned her daughter against him. But her disapproval had an unexpected effect. Instead of pulling Mary away, it pushed her closer. The secrecy and tension only intensified the emotional pull between the young couple, turning their relationship into something more impulsive and emotionally charged. At just 19 years old, Mary made a life-changing decision. She married Owen Moore. But almost immediately after the wedding, reality began to set in. The excitement faded, and what once felt like passion started to feel like a mistake she could not undo. Both Griffith and Charlotte had tried to prevent the relationship, but neither succeeded. Owen eventually left D.W. Griffith's studio, and through his connections he helped Mary secure opportunities at a new production company. Ironically, Mary's talent quickly outgrew his own career. She was so skilled at negotiation and performance that she even managed deals not just for herself, but for her family as well. Yet behind the scenes, complications were growing. Mary kept parts of her professional life hidden from her mother, especially the full extent of her independence. At the same time, Owen began to feel overshadowed. He had once been the more established figure, but Mary's rising success shifted the balance between them in a painful way. What Owen wanted was stability and commitment. He pushed for a more serious, permanent future, while Mary, still young and unsure, struggled with the weight of those expectations. Without openly addressing the situation, she found herself moving forward in secret, making choices that deepened the emotional strain between them. Eventually, in early 1911, the couple eloped. What was meant to feel like a romantic escape quickly turned into emotional turmoil. Instead of a fairy tale beginning, Mary found herself trapped in regret and confusion. She was unable to fully confide in her mother, and at the same time she struggled to communicate openly with Owen. The silence between them became heavier than any argument. Owen carried his own inner battles. As Mary's career began to rise faster than his, jealousy and insecurity took root. These emotions, combined with his increasing dependence on alcohol, created a toxic shift in their relationship. Over time, tension escalated, and moments of emotional strain became more frequent and more damaging. Work life offered little relief. During a film shoot on the harsh waters of the Hudson River, Mary experienced a frightening incident when a boat nearly struck her. In the panic that followed, she became overwhelmed with fear, misreading the situation as a threat rather than an accident. The experience left a deep emotional mark, adding to her growing sense that something in her life needed to change. Eventually, she traveled abroad for work, including a trip to Cuba. It was during this journey that the emotional pressure inside her finally broke through. On the ship, away from familiar surroundings, she confessed everything: her struggles, her marriage, and the burden she had been carrying in silence. The reaction from her family was intense. Her mother was devastated, and her siblings were deeply disapproving. But this was only the beginning of a much larger unraveling. Once in Cuba, Owen's instability worsened. His insecurities and drinking escalated, eventually leading to a public incident that drew serious attention and forced intervention. The situation became chaotic, involving authorities and urgent attempts to protect him from consequences. Despite her disapproval of the marriage, Charlotte still intervened to help him escape trouble, even arranging assistance for his departure. Back in her professional life, Mary began to distance herself emotionally. Work became her refuge. A legal conflict between studios emerged around this time, and rather than focusing on her collapsing marriage, she poured her energy into her career. The industry itself was changing rapidly, and Mary adapted by stepping into new opportunities and asserting more control over her work. Even so, she did not immediately end her marriage. In fact, at one point she quietly helped Owen secure employment within her professional circle. But the emotional damage between them had already taken root. His jealousy remained, and her growing independence only widened the gap. Her mother's constant involvement added yet another layer of strain. Despite her success and authority in Hollywood, Mary still relied heavily on Charlotte's presence in her personal life. This dependency created friction within her marriage, especially as Owen felt increasingly excluded and overwhelmed by the dynamic. Eventually, the situation reached a breaking point. Mary began making changes, stepping away from environments tied to her marriage and seeking both emotional and creative distance. She returned to working with D.W. Griffith to refine her craft, then moved between Broadway and film, continuing to evolve as an artist. During this period, she formed a connection with director James Kirkwood. He later acknowledged that they shared a romantic relationship and even discussed marriage, though it never became permanent. They did collaborate on successful projects, but once again, personal happiness remained elusive. As time passed, Mary found herself seeking distraction in work and social engagements, anything that could ease the emotional weight she carried. It was through one of these gatherings that she eventually crossed paths with Douglas Fairbanks, a meeting that would quietly mark the beginning of yet another turning point in her life. As time moved forward, emotions only became more complicated. Between Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks, what began as simple comfort quickly turned into a powerful romantic connection. Sparks didn't just fly, they ignited something neither of them fully expected. In each other's presence, they found warmth, understanding, and escape from the pressures of their public lives. But that same connection also carried consequences that neither could fully control. Their relationship developed in secrecy at first, carefully managed and guarded from public view. Fairbanks was still married, and although he often returned home, his emotional attachment to Mary kept pulling him away. It was a divided existence, one foot in duty, the other drifting toward desire. Yet something about Mary made it increasingly difficult for him to maintain that balance. Letters were exchanged, meetings were cautious, and every interaction carried both excitement and risk. Mary's mother, Charlotte, remained deeply protective, constantly trying to manage what she could and quietly covering gaps whenever suspicions arose. She even reportedly took steps behind the scenes to keep their private affairs from becoming public knowledge, aware of how quickly Hollywood could turn admiration into scandal. At one point, the relationship nearly collapsed under pressure. Both Mary and Fairbanks understood the danger of exposure and the emotional cost of continuing. But life has a way of shifting plans unexpectedly. When Fairbanks's mother passed away, he found himself emotionally vulnerable, and in that moment, Mary became his main source of comfort. That loss pulled them closer again, reinforcing a bond that neither seemed able to fully break. Eventually, whispers of their relationship began circulating within the industry. Hollywood was a tightly connected world, and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. Still, nothing was officially confirmed at first, and the public remained unaware of the full truth. But that silence would not last forever. Everything changed during a high-profile public event involving Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and Charlie Chaplin as they traveled to sell war bonds during World War I. In a moment of personal crisis, Fairbanks did not return home to his wife afterward. That absence became the breaking point. Distraught and humiliated, his wife publicly accused him of infidelity, confirming suspicions and revealing that another woman in the industry was involved. The situation exploded overnight. People began connecting the dots, and even those who were unaware started piecing together the story. As rumors spread, Fairbanks himself added fuel to the fire through interviews, positioning himself in a way that made the situation even more visible. At that point, the truth was no longer something that could be contained. Mary understood the reality clearly: the only way forward was divorce. But in that era, legal separation was complicated, especially in California, where social and legal barriers made such cases difficult. Determined, she hired lawyers to navigate the process and find a way out of the marriage that had long since collapsed emotionally. Fairbanks eventually agreed to the divorce, but not without conditions. Financial settlements became part of the arrangement, with significant sums exchanged before everything was finalized. Once the legal process was complete, he traveled to Nevada to finalize a same-day divorce, officially ending his previous marriage. For Mary, the situation carried enormous risk. She feared that the scandal would permanently damage her reputation and destroy everything she had built. But surprisingly, the opposite happened. Instead of rejection, the public responded with fascination. Rather than ending her career, the moment reshaped it. In 1920, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks were married. What followed was one of Hollywood's most legendary partnerships. To the public, they weren't just a couple, they were icons. Their marriage was seen as glamorous, almost mythical, and together they became symbols of early Hollywood royalty. Their home became a gathering place for some of the most influential figures of the time. Lavish parties were held regularly, attended by cultural giants such as F. Scott Fitzgerald, Albert Einstein, Helen Keller, Arthur Conan Doyle, and even Amelia Earhart. European aristocrats and political figures also passed through their doors, turning their residence into a hub of fame, intellect, and influence. But behind the glittering surface, reality was far more complex. Despite constant social activity, Mary often experienced deep loneliness. Her fame created emotional distance between herself and others, making genuine connection increasingly difficult. Fairbanks, too, struggled with insecurity and jealousy, particularly when other men showed admiration toward Mary. Their relationship, though powerful, was not free from tension. They wanted to build a family, but tragedy and rumors surrounded them. There were claims and speculation about a previous pregnancy during Mary's earlier marriage to Owen Moore, and suggestions that it had ended in a way that affected her ability to have children later. Whether fully accurate or not, such rumors added emotional weight to an already complicated life. As the years passed, Fairbanks's career began to decline, and with that change came emotional strain. At the same time, Mary, influenced by family patterns and personal stress, began struggling with alcohol. The emotional distance between them slowly widened, even though they remained publicly united for a time. Their marriage, once seen as unbreakable, gradually began to fracture. Both sought comfort elsewhere, and the connection that once defined Hollywood's golden couple started to fade. Eventually, they separated and later divorced, ending what had once been one of the most celebrated unions in film history. Mary did not have the fairy tale ending the public once imagined for her. In the years that followed, she focused on filling emotional gaps in her life. In the early 1940s, she adopted 2 children, hoping to build a sense of family she had long desired. But motherhood did not unfold as she had expected. Personal struggles, emotional distance, and ongoing battles with depression made it difficult for her to fully connect, and the relationship with her children became strained over time. Then came another devastating blow. Late one night, Mary received news that Douglas Fairbanks had suffered a fatal heart attack. The man who had once defined a major chapter of her life was gone. Overcome with grief, she chose not to attend the funeral, a decision made in part to avoid adding further pain to those already mourning. As the years continued, tragedy seemed to follow her. She lost her mother to cancer, her brother's life took a troubled path, and her sister also passed away. Each loss added another layer of emotional burden. Despite her immense wealth and global recognition, none of it shielded her from sorrow. Fame had given her everything the world could offer, yet it could not protect her from personal pain. In the end, she lived a life filled with extraordinary success on the outside, while carrying quiet suffering within. Mary Pickford's story is not just about Hollywood's rise, it is about the hidden cost of living inside it.